what is a constitution? Seems a pretty obvious question, but there are two kinds of constitutions. The first is a showcase constitution, and you got that in the former Soviet Union. You have it now in countries like Belarus and a few others, full of wonderful aspirations. Everybody must help everybody if they get into trouble. The rich must look after the poor, and the poor must look after the elderly. On and so on and so on. Wonderful, marvelous utopian society, but we knew that in those countries the constitution wasn't serious. A great ceremony was held, vodka was drunk, bottles were the shots were thrown over the shoulder with the constitution, which then landed in a bottom drawer somewhere, never to be heard of or seen again. Certainly no implementation. The power was at the center, and it remained at the center, and that was that. And the other model is the proper working constitution, a constitution that sets out realistic values, realistic aspirations, intended as the framework for the day-to-day decision-making of the country, that grind of constant official decisions that will take place in everyday life. Some parts of the Constitution are enabling, and others are disabling. What do I mean by that? The enabling sections confer power. They confer power on Parliament or the President, whoever's the Prime Minister, on the courts, on local authorities, on regional authorities, and they give them power to make decisions about people in their everyday life. But, and this is important about constitutions, there are other sections. This is something which governments often don't understand in the flush of a new constitution. The other sections are disabling. There are certain things that government cannot do, constraints upon the government, where government ends and individual liberties and freedoms begin. And those are normally the human rights parts of those constitutions. And it is in respect of these disabling parts of the Constitution that it has been said that the Constitution is a device for pre-commitment or binding. It's a tie imposed by Peter when sober upon Peter when drunk. A constitution ties the government to some extent to a mast in order not to be tempted or distorted by short-term political gains or passions. A constitution is a framework for decision-making rather than an instrument of political decision-making. It creates the vessels, it creates the institutions, and it will be the people that come in later to fill those. And it requires a culture of democracy, and that's very important too, and I'll come back to that in order to work properly. The other thing that a constitution can do, of course, is it can elevate certain values or institutions to a higher level, to a higher order level. For example, in South Africa, they decided that the notion of administrative justice, the day-to-day decisions made by public officials about people, should be a constitutional value. Before that, decisions had been made, particularly in respect of black people, in an arbitrary way, unreasonable way, without fair hearings. They thought they would elevate this notion in the way that's not done in this country and many other countries. It comes here through the common law, administrative law, to a higher level, so that the notion of what they call just administrative action or administrative justice should actually be enshrined in the Constitution and held out to the people as something that the new South Africa, as opposed to the old South Africa, would abide by. Our approach in this paper, which you haven't got in front of you, and it's a page, almost 60 pages of single spaces, and it's some of it's very dry, but we try and go through all the sort of main choices. Since writing it, one has thought of all sorts of other areas that you could, if you wished, put into the Constitution. The more and more you talk with Libyans, the more and more you realize perhaps you want to constitutionalize some other aspects that you want to preserve and to create as a higher order law. But at the moment, what we've done is we've, as sensitively as we can to Libyan history and the recent past, and its clear willingness to move towards a democracy, equality, and the rule of law, to seek a new beginning. It becomes what's also known as a never again constitution to remove what things that we don't like from our recent and longer past, and never let them happen again. But having done that, we're very much guided by the declaration of the Transitional National Council, which does provide a framework, without much detail, but a framework for democratic government and guarantees of human rights, and it provides, in a sense, a roadmap for transition from liberation to democracy. But we've also looked very much at recent constitutions that have come through a similar history. So we've looked at South Africa, and we've looked at Kenya, and we've looked at Tunisia, and we've looked at Iraq, and we've looked at Afghanistan, and we've looked at countries that have gone through this kind of transition and have also faced with and sort of concentrated in some ways on those kind of countries and those that are also based on Islam. But we haven't only looked at those countries. And it's amazing how exciting this is that so many countries have recently been through this. Amazing and exciting because every country can learn, as has been said, from every other. And there's a great deal of material now on which to learn. I remember only 10, 15 years ago teaching constitutional law and putting thousands of students over the years to sleep because constitution was such a boring, constitutional law was a pretty boring subject. Now it has a vibrance because people realize that it's not only a dry document, but it really is the foundation of people's lives and the decisions made about their lives. And there's so many countries that have gone through the system. It hasn't been happy at the time, and I was very moved by what Ibrahim said about the events of the past few weeks, which one has just looked at with enormous admiration, and how it hasn't all been easy, and how I must remember that and remember it in the Constitution. So let's look now at some of our. I've been told 3 times now to make this short, and I will do so, but I haven't yet got into any detail. I won't deal with much detail because we can bring those out in questions, and some of it, as I said, is pretty dry. But let's just go through the items which we've dealt with. We start, of course, with the preamble. Now, a preamble to a country's constitution doesn't actually, for the lawyers, as the lawyers will know, have any direct legal effect. You can't say the preamble says this and therefore I want this sort of thing as a right. But it does inform the whole constitution. It also sets the scene. It's terribly important for the people of the country to know that there is a preamble that somehow, in some way, encapsulates the values that the Constitution seeks to achieve. The Constitution, the preamble is where you normally go to see the sort of autobiographical elements of a constitution. What's happened? What do we want to be in the future? And there is a bit of a preamble in the declaration, the draft constitutional charter, which indicates certainly very firmly that Libya wants to move away from injustice, tyranny, despotism, exploitation, and dictatorship. So that becomes very clear. But where do you want to go? Again, some countries say we want to achieve a democratic and open society in which government is based on the will of the people, where every citizen is equally protected by the law. Some will mention the quality of life. Others will talk about unity and diversity. And others will talk about social justice. That's an element that comes into constitution, into preambles as well. It sort of points the way, in some way, these preambles. Again, the South African constitution talks about human dignity, as does the German constitution, and non-racialism, non-sexism, supremacy of the Constitution, and the rule of law. A number of constitutions do speak about the rule of law in their preamble. So this is important. The role of religion, of course, is also something that very often comes into the preamble and sets the scene for the kind of country you want to be. And you'll see in our paper that there are a number of constitutions that simply provide that religion is the source of law, that Sharia is the source of all legislation and all law, and then others that are completely secular, and others again, like Iraq, and I was somewhat involved in that particular provision there, which declares Islam to be a foundation source of legislation, but prevents laws which contradict not only the established provisions of Islam, but also the principles of democracy and the rights and basic freedoms stipulated in this constitution. So you try there to get a consistency and a balance between provisions of Islam at the one hand, and if there is to be a clash in any particular area, try and get a consistency, try and reconcile those provisions with the rights and basic freedoms that are stated in this constitution. Again, and this issue will be dealt with later, the question of the minorities is an important one here, and I will leave that to later discussion. And some of these constitutions deal with this.